Hello, my name is Peter Rising and I am a lifelong Star Trek fan. I'm here to share with you my memories and my feelings on all of the Star Trek episodes that I have seen many, many times over in my lifetime. We are going through, obviously, the original series. We've already been through the first two Star Trek pilots, and this is the first actual episode that was recorded for the series, but wasn't actually broadcast until the 10th in broadcast order. This is called the Corbomite Maneuver, and we're going to get right into it. Stay tuned. The first thing that I really like about this episode is the introduction of the new uniforms, what would become the recognizable uniforms worn all throughout the original series 3 seasons from 1966 to 1968. These were in colors of gold and blue and red, replacing what were gold, blue, and a sort of salmon-y color. The differences that were most notable were the fact that the collars now had a black sort of rim, if you want to call it that, and the rank insignia on the cuffs were not straight, they were sort of wavy now. So they were the most noticeable differences. The collars on these uniforms, as you can see in the shot of Spock and Navigator Dave Bailey wearing them in this image, are not quite there yet in terms of what would become the final versions. They are still quite high, especially on Spock. You can see visible either zips or some sort of fastenings there. So they were getting there with these uniforms, but they were not quite yet the final versions. But I really like these. These are what we would come to know and love, and I think they look really, really good. The next big plus for me is Anthony Cole as Navigator Lieutenant Dave Bailey. And his performance in this episode is absolutely stellar. He plays a really young, inexperienced, naive navigator, and he just nails this performance as somebody. He really is telling the story from our perspective, the viewer's perspective. We are seeing this through his lens of somebody who doesn't have the experience, isn't as seasoned or as hardened as the rest of the senior bridge crew. He's been promoted too fast, as the Doctor would later note to Captain Kirk, and he just absolutely is wonderful in this performance. So looking at Anthony Cole's IMDb, he's still quite active today and mainly in the arena of doing narration for television, and he's been in lots of things throughout his earlier career alongside Star Trek. He was in things like The Fugitive and Bonanza and doing the TV rounds, but a big plus for me, Anthony Cole as Bailey. Next, I want to give a massive thumbs up to George Takei as Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu in his familiar and final position on the ship. He is at the helm and now wearing, in the new style uniform, yellow with the dark collar. So he's now the helmsman. You'll recall that in the second pilot, where no man has gone before, he was the head of the astrophysics department, and this is the Sulu we've all come to know and love, though. And throughout this episode, he is particularly vocal, as we'll get to a bit later. And I think he puts in a really good performance alongside Lieutenant Bailey, who is sat next to him at the Navigator station. Really, really cool to see Sulu where we would come to know and love him. And I just loved his performance in this episode. The next thumbs up is for Nichelle Nichols, the wonderful, late and great Nichelle Nichols, in her first ever appearance as Lieutenant Nyota Uhura. And she doesn't get a lot to do in Star Trek, the original series, for the most part. She has moments where she shines, and we'll highlight those as we go along the way. So I'm giving Nichelle a thumbs up because Nichelle was absolutely wonderful, a real star of the franchise. She also gets a little bit of a thumbs down in regards to what she has to do in the episodes for the most part. She's a glorified switchboard operator, but for the times, this was actually quite pioneering to have a woman, not only a woman, but a woman of color, in an important role on the bridge of a starship, and notably, the late Martin Luther King advised Nichelle Nichols not to quit when she considered doing so after the first season. So wonderful to see Nichelle here in her first appearance at the communications station. You will note that she is wearing yellow, which would not be her final uniform color. She would become much more well known for wearing the red uniform. But there you go, Nichelle Nichols. Wonderful to see her, and we'll see more from her as we go along. The next thing I want to give a big thumbs up to is the bridge of the Enterprise, and we see it here in this shot in all its glory. This is what it would come to look like for the rest of the show, broadly speaking. I think there might have been some minor alterations to it, but it's changed again since the pilots. Gone are the monitors that everyone had on their stations, including the captain's chair. And it just looks how we would come to know and love it for the rest of those 3 seasons of original Trek. And we see in this shot, the beginning of this episode, setting the scene for the story with Spock in command of the bridge. The captain is, as we'll see in a moment, getting his quarterly physical check with the Doctor, who we'll talk about. But the bridge looks great. It's lovely to see it. It's lovely to hear it as well. The sound effects of the bridge that were created. Oh, everything just comes together, and it just looks wonderful and sounds wonderful too. So the Enterprise is a character in and of itself as well, and it's just so lovely. I love this. Now, after the alert snaps on the bridge and we see that there's an object moving towards the Enterprise, we then go into the opening credits. And this is the first time we see these iconic opening credits. And we hear the voiceover of William Shatner as Captain James T. Kirk saying, "Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages." You know the rest if you're a Star Trek fan. But iconic, really, really love this. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, I've seen it so many times that when I watch the episodes now, I skip the opening credits. Not everybody likes that. My wife is a big fan of watching opening credits for everything she ever watches, but looks great. We've got the official Star Trek font in glorious yellow, and we have 2 names on the opening cast. We've got William Shatner and we've got Leonard Nimoy. This looks great, sounds great with the final opening theme by Alexander Courage. I absolutely love this. Following the opening credits, we get a captain's log to set the scene of what's going on the Enterprise. James T. Kirk announces to us all through his log that he is in sickbay getting his quarterly medical, and we get a lovely shot of the Enterprise with the cube, which is a lovely effect. These remastered effects are so wonderful. It's nice to see everything looking so polished and so just wonderful. And when they did the remastered effects, they didn't go too far. They didn't make it look too good. So it still has a very authentic sort of 60s feel and look to it. So I really like that. And then we get into the sick bay and we see something that, funnily enough, this is actually the first actual real episode. If you forget the pilots and not really count them as real episodes, as many people would not. And we see Kirk in the sick bay, sort of pedaling on these things on the wall to exercise and get his heart rate up, and the Doctor can monitor him. And we would only see this one other time, and it was in the very final episode in season 3. The less said about that episode, the better, but we'll get to that in due course. But I just think it's kind of like bookending the series, really. It's bizarre to me that that was only in 2 episodes, and it was the very first and the very last. And here, what I really love about this scene, though, as well, is that it introduces us to Deforest Kelley as Dr. Leonard H. McCoy, the crusty old country doctor from Georgia. And what a character. What an absolute legend of an actor, legend of a character. He'd been well known for his roles in westerns, playing mainly bad guys, I believe. Truth be told, I've not actually ever seen Deforest Kelley in anything other than Star Trek. I've never seen him in anything else. I should take the time and have a look to see some of his other performances. But I love this guy. He brought the main trio, the big 3, if you like, into play, and our big 3 was complete. And that dynamic that we will see grow throughout the 3 seasons of Star Trek, of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, was just so wonderful. And what I really love about them as a trio is that you have the dynamic leadership of Kirk, you have the cold logic of Spock, although we would come to learn that there was more to him than that, and the humanity of Dr. Leonard McCoy, also known as Bones. His nickname is Bones. And what I really love particularly is that throughout my life, from first watching Star Trek as a young child, I have moved from who my favorite characters were. When I was a young boy, I was obviously drawn to the swashbuckling, fighting leadership of James T. Kirk. He was my favorite character. As I got into my later years as a young man in my teens and early 20s, as I went through certain phases, both lifestyle-wise and musically and all that sort of stuff, I gravitated more towards the dark and moody sort of phase, and was very, very heavily influenced by Spock, gravitated very much to him. And as I've grown older and into my later and hopefully wiser years, I've come to appreciate the humanity of the old country doctor, but they make up kind of a Gestalt entity, really, in a way, of one combined, really intelligent, emotional, logical being, if you like, and McCoy is just wonderful. So there you go. So I've moved my camera slightly. As you will have noticed, the sunshine was coming through my office window, and I don't have a blind on that, so I had no way of masking that. So this may be a better position for this anyway, so let me know what you think in the comments. But anyway, let's crack on. The next thing that I really love about the Corbomite Maneuver, and I'm noticing that there's lots of things that I like so far as opposed to things that I dislike. I'm sure we'll get there though, and we will be covering trivia too. But the next thing I really love is when Kirk leaves sickbay to go to the bridge after he's found out that there is a red alert, which McCoy hid from him. He walks through a very crowded corridor scene of the Enterprise, and it's lovely to see the Enterprise so well populated with lots of people doing important jobs. I don't know what half of those jobs are. There's people wearing some very strange vests and operating some dials and all sorts of stuff, but it's lovely to see the ship populated. It's also good to see Kirk is very confident in himself as a man, as a human. He doesn't cover himself up. He's sweaty after his physical. He's carrying his boots. He's got his shirt on his shoulder. As we've already noted in the first pilot, Kirk is not afraid to get his shirt ripped and or take his shirt off and show his torso a bit. And this theme continues right into this first episode. So great to see the Enterprise as a community, all the people going about their jobs when the ship's at alert. Love it. Next, you see Kirk going into the turbo lift, and as far as I recall from the first pilot and the second pilot, this is the first time that we see in the turbo lift, looking a bit different, the handheld devices that made the turbo lifts move. I believe that's what they're there to do in any case. That was never really clear until much, much later. I'm sure those of you who watched Deep Space Nine and a particular tribute episode will know what I'm talking about there. But nice to see the turbo lifts. Nice to see Kirk talking on the intercom in the turbo lift as he heads to the bridge and then diverts to his quarters to go and change first because the situation has not escalated such that he needs to rush. So really good stuff. And I'm loving that we're getting to see the Enterprise that we would come to know and love just being defined and being introduced to us in this way. So in the next scene, we see Kirk arriving on the bridge. And what I particularly like about this photo that you're seeing now of his arrival on the bridge is the unusual angle that we see. We very, very rarely get that perspective of the individual we're focusing on. We normally see it from the point of view of the bridge, the doors opening from out, we're within the bridge, and here we're coming from the inside the turbo lift perspective, which is a very unusual angle. And the doors open, we can see Bailey at a station, we can see that Spock has moved from being in the command chair, back to his familiar science position, ready for Kirk's arrival. And Kirk walks and he goes to Spock first and then to Lieutenant Uhura to get an evaluation of the situation they're in with this cube. So I really like this perspective that we see. And we don't often see this perspective from a trivia point of view. Here's some of the trivia that I always promise. You really only see this sort of perspective of the bridge in a couple of other episodes, and I think season 3 is what I'm thinking about, and we'll get to those episodes, but I'm talking about an episode called And the Children Shall Lead, which is possibly the worst, if not one of the worst episodes of Star Trek in my opinion, and also a very divisive episode, but one that I actually quite love, is Spock's Brain, also from Series 3, where you get a very unique perspective of the bridge, not from coming out of the turbo lift, but from behind the captain's chair, where Kirk is talking with Sulu and another character that we've not been introduced yet, and we'll get to that obviously in due course. But love this perspective, really, really cool indeed. As Kirk goes around the bridge, he gets an assessment from his department heads of the situation they are in, one of which is Scotty, Montgomery Scott, Chief Engineer of the USS Enterprise, played by James Doohan. Now, we already had been introduced to Scotty and James Doohan in the second pilot, where no man has gone before. But here we see Scotty looking as we would come to know and love him, wearing his familiar red and not that earlier salmon version of the uniform. The final uniform's here again, looking really good, really smart, not quite familiar as they would come to feel and as comfortable yet, because the collars were a bit weird. Scotty had various hairstyles throughout the 3 seasons of Star Trek, it's fair to say. Over the course of the various Star Trek that James Doohan was in as Scotty, he changed his appearance in many ways over the years in terms of hairstyles, parted to the left, parted to the right, swept back and almost like very, very short. And then, of course, he grew his mustache for the movies and his weight fluctuated. So the hairstyles that he had in season 1 and season 2, I didn't think really suited him that well. His hair looked a little bit too greasy at times, if anything. And I think as he got to season 3, I think that's when he looked his best, to be honest. But nitpicking there a bit, and I'm not picking on poor old, the late, great Jimmy Doohan, because I absolutely love him. But, you've got to do a bit of nitpicking at times. But great to see Scotty in his familiar red. And in the shot you're seeing now, there are 2 extras behind him that I just want to highlight, one of which is Leslie Watch, Eddie Paskey there as Lieutenant Leslie, sat at the engineering station on the bridge, and he is joined there by another regular background extra actor who we would see throughout the original series. He was only named by name once, I believe, in an episode coming up called The Naked Time, and I believe he was addressed by Spock as Lieutenant Brent, so that's what I'm going to call him. But Leslie Watch, there we go, we'll get a clearer shot of him a bit later, but he's in more episodes than not, as you might remember me saying during the pilot. The next scene that we get, really, that I love is in the briefing room. Now, this is the debut of this briefing room and how it would come to look for the rest of the series. Now, I really like this, and I particularly love to see the busyness of this scene as Kirk does a supplemental log entry to say that they've been stuck with this cube in front of them for many, many hours now. I love that people are clearly tired, and that is being portrayed. Sulu's got his head resting on the desk. Uhura has her arm resting on her head. She looks tired and bored. They're clearly frustrated. They've got cups of coffee. They've got a screen on there with all sorts of statistics on there. And this is just such a great scene setter, if you like, and establishing this location, the briefing room, which I think might have been on deck 6 in a season 2 episode, Return to Tomorrow specifically. I'm sure a character said, "I'm in your deck 6 briefing room." I don't know if that suggests there's more than one briefing room. But interestingly, as Star Trek would evolve over the years into the next generation and various other iterations, the location of briefing or conference rooms would change from being on lower decks of the ship to very close to or on the same level as the bridge on deck one, either behind the bridge or to the left or right of the bridge, in the form of either a conference lounge and or a captain's ready room. We see a little bit of liberty taking with this when we get into the and reminder that I am covering spoilers here. This is not a reaction video watching for the first time. It assumes that you've seen Star Trek before. When we get to some of the newer series like Strange New Worlds, we see that the captain does have a ready stroke briefing room combined on the bridge of this Enterprise in a prequel. So very logical, very understandable that they would update the Enterprise for what they can do in this day and age of filming and creating content. So, but I really like this briefing room. I think it looks really cool and sets the scene really well. Now, the next scene we move into are main characters and supporting characters return to the bridge, and Kirk has made a decision to try pulling away from the cube, and they do so. As they try and do so, the cube moves with them and won't let go of the Enterprise. So we end up with something that I really want to highlight as a thumbs up for me, the first time that we see the Enterprise firing phasers from the ship itself, and this looks really good. Now, it's obviously in remastered form. I believe in the original before remastered effects, the color of the phasers was different. I seem to have a memory of it being two beams of red light that came very, very quickly from the Enterprise. In this remastered effect, it is sort of a light blue and much thinner beams emanating from the lower part of the saucer section of the Enterprise. And this, I think, in remastered form would become consistent. The color would remain the same, whereas it had changed in some of those earlier unremastered effects. But I really like this. I think it shows you what the Enterprise can do, how powerful the ship is, and it looks really, really great. So the cube is destroyed, and then Kirk has a decision to make. Do they back away from this and go to safety, or do they move forward? Do they probe forward and see where this cube came from, what its point of origin was, and what sort of intelligence sent that to encounter them? And this sets up something that I really, really do like. Again, more likes than dislikes in this episode. But we get our first real Kirk and Spock conversation with them as different personalities. We have Kirk showing that he listens as a leader to his most trusted advisor, who is Spock, who is his second in command, his first officer, and his science officer. And then he makes a decision based on those recommendations, but he doesn't always necessarily take the advice that he is given. And this is a cool example of that. And Spock highlights this very fact. He says there's a certain inefficiency about asking me for advice that you're ultimately not going to take. And Kirk replies with a line that just gives me such a feeling of warmth about the depth of the relationship of these characters already, the respect and regard that they have for each other. He says, brilliantly acted, by the way, by William Shatner, it gives me emotional security. And it just shows the bond of these two people in this world that we love so much of Star Trek. Leonard Nimoy, William Shatner, my applause to your performances all throughout Star Trek, but one of those little examples there of their chemistry just being so good. Now, next, we have a sort of a thumbs up and a thumbs down. We move to the captain's quarters, where Kirk has gone to with Dr. Leonard McCoy, while some simulated drills are taking place on the bridge because response times have not been to Kirk's liking. In the quarters, the door opens as Kirk and McCoy are chatting. McCoy saying that he's worried about Bailey, too much pressure being put on him, promoted too soon. In walks the late, great Grace Lee Whitney in her first on-screen appearance in Star Trek as Yeoman Janice Rand. What I love about her is Grace Lee Whitney was just a wonderful soul, a lovely person. You could clearly see that. And she really, really didn't get much to do in Star Trek in the short time that she was in the TV series, and we would later see her come back in various forms in movies and fan films. But what is much like Uhura, but even worse, the women of the series were there to do certain roles. The yeoman is the captain's personal assistant. She's there to bring him food, bring him coffee, take care of him, basically fuss over him, and be almost a caregiver. And it's this again, probably to the writers of the time in the 60s, probably felt very progressive, but really, she and Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, were there as, I hate saying the words, but they were there to be eye candy, effectively, with the uniforms being very, very of their time for the women in this show, being very, very short dresses. And the 60s, that was not uncommon of female style, so it was of its time. But as we look back on that now, it could feel, it definitely does feel and looks very demeaning at times, the what the women were given to do in this show. And Star Trek has grown and evolved over the years to rightly place females into positions of authority and responsibility in these shows, and showing what they are capable of. And even the next generation, and we'll get to those hopefully as we go through, even Next Gen didn't get that completely right, with two of the main female characters really being in caregiver roles, and they would evolve over time to be more badass though. But I digress. Janice Rand, love Grace Lee Whitney. She would evolve and get her moment to shine and come back in smaller ways later, but these early appearances were quite unfortunate, both from a character standpoint and also from the personal life of the actress herself, who went through some not so nice things. So very shortly after this scene in the captain's quarters, which the funny part of it is the Doctor has the captain's diet cart changed, and he's on green leaves, and he's not pleased about it. And nor would I be. I like my food, and I'm not particularly a lettuce or a salady guy. I want my good food. But anyway, I digress. The next scene, we get back to the bridge. We're called back to the bridge. This is not a drill, and something else is coming. And then the next thing I want to give a big thumbs up to is the ship that we see appear, and the sheer scale of it next to the Enterprise. It dwarfs the Enterprise, and this ultimately turns out to be a first Federation vessel. And again, we're in spoiler territory here. I'm going to give this a thumbs down, actually, because we never see or hear from these again. First Federation vessel, never seen from again. It probably crops up in something like Lower Decks or in Beta Canon or something like that later on, and I'm sure we'll get to those sort of trivia references as we go through the various other shows. But I would have liked to see more of this species, and even in the context of this episode, as I'm sure you will know or come to know, we don't see much of them really, and we don't get to know much more about them. But the ship looks incredible. It's like a big globe with looks like a pins all sort of put together in a globe, like a circular pin cushion, if you like. But I really like how this ship looks. And this is where Dave Bailey comes into his own, or the actor who played him, I should say, Anthony Cole, comes into his own, where he starts getting into the panics. He can't cope. He's getting anxiety. He's zoning out. He's not handling the pressure, as you can see in this photograph here, and he's just mesmerized. He loses it, and Sulu has to start responding to orders from the captain that are given to his navigator when Bailey just zones out. And just great character work, and I love to see it. Now, next, the thing that I want to give a thumbs down to, something I don't like and never have liked, is the shimmering image on the view screen of Balok, or Balok, however you want to call him, because he's referred to as both pronunciations throughout the episode. That's another thumbs down, actually, when not everyone gets the memo on what a character should be pronounced as. So Balak, make your mind up. And it's not the first or last time that will happen throughout the series, I'm sure. There will be other examples. But the design of this puppet is of its time, yes. It's really bad. It's really awful. It's not really scary at all. I mean, it might have been at the time when I was a child. It might have come across that way. But, and I don't like the shimmering effect. I don't know what all that's about. I guess it was a ruse on the part of the Balak, the real Balak, to not sort of telegraph the fact that they were looking at a puppet, really. But no, I didn't like this. It just didn't work for me. So moving on from that, we get the unfortunate situation that Balak can quickly overpower the Enterprise. He can immobilize them. It just illustrates the sheer power of the first Federation vessel in comparison to the very powerful Enterprise. And they're trapped. They're told that as a result of their ignoring the warning buoy that they destroyed earlier and then incurring into First Federation space, that they will be destroyed, and they have 10 minutes to prepare themselves. And we get this countdown, which Sulu just goes through in absolute glee almost, despite the fact that from their perspective, they're all about to blow up and die. And Bailey, again, comes into his own here, and he's just lost it. He doesn't understand why everyone's so calm, why everyone's accepting this. And this is a thumbs up for me in terms of the performance, but it's kind of also a thumbs down for me in terms of, would anyone really be allowed to ascend to a position of responsibility on a starship of the Federation, even lower decks in important roles that take place lower decks in other sections, but on the bridge in an important position like the navigation position? Would psychological profiling and evaluations, which I'm certain Starfleet officers would have to go through, would their training, would it not make them ready for this sort of situation? I know that there's things that anyone can never be prepared for, but in Star Trek history, we're led to believe that these are people who can handle a crisis. They are experienced and they know how to deal with these sort of things. And I don't particularly buy that someone as experienced as Kirk or the senior command crew of the Enterprise would put a young man of this disposition into this position. And that rhymed, didn't it? But I have trouble accepting that Bailey actually would have been in that position in the first place. But it's a plot point. It's a decision to give us, the viewer, a perspective, a very real and natural perspective that most people would feel in this situation. So I applaud it on that point, but it takes me out of this world as something that is a red flag to me that I don't think would really happen. Little bit of trivia for you coming up here is that during this countdown sequence, we get various shots of Dr. McCoy on the bridge. He's come to the bridge, and the picture you're seeing now on screen, he's standing next to Spock, who sat at his science station, and he is wearing, McCoy that is wearing the medical uniform that he wears traditionally in sickbay when he's treating patients, the short-sleeved version of the uniform, which I really like, by the way. That's a thumbs up for that uniform for the chief medical officer. It's got the same sort of dark color, but it's a more shiny material and clearly is for medical use. Now, a few moments later on the bridge, that changes. McCoy is back in standard uniform, the long sleeve, with his rank on the long sleeve cuffs. So a little bit of a continuity error there that's there to show you a little bit of trivia that I always like to put into these episodes for you. Here's another bit of trivia for you. We're going to hone in on a very clear view on this photo that I'm showing you on screen now of Mr. Leslie Watch, sat at his engineering station. He turns around to view what's going on. We get a good view of him, Lieutenant Brent standing arms folded next to him, and Sulu is taking absolute glee and counting down these 10 minutes till their oblivion, and Scotty's walking past the helm saying, "You have an annoying fascination with timepieces, Mr. Sulu." And love this scene, but bit of Leslie watch there for you. Love that. Big thumbs up from me. Yet another bit of trivia. We can see a close-up of the chronometer in between the helm and the navigation position, and it comes to 1 minute to go, where we can see we're almost at 1 minute, and then we go to a shot of Sulu, who again says 1 minute, and then Sulu says, after a brief pause, "I knew he would," but we don't hear anything between those statements. What was meant to happen there was Baylock was meant to say, "You now have 1 minute left," but it was not ever put into the episode for whatever reason. So the sentence kind of doesn't make sense when Sulu says, "I knew he would," but nice little bit of trivia there for you as well, which I do enjoy. Next, we come to another thumbs down moment. This crisis is going on, and here comes our caregiving Yeoman Rand again. She enters the bridge, and her job is to bring hot coffee. And she used her initiative. She used a hand phaser and zap hot coffee because the power was off in the galley. Another example of how women were placed into these caregiving roles in the show. So I didn't like that at all, but on the plus side, it's always good to see Grace Lee Whitney as much as we can in this show, because she was a wonderful, talented actress, and it's a shame we didn't get to see much more of her as many people have said over the years. This brings me to another thumbs down here, and that one of the criticisms I have of this episode is the pacing. It feels a little long-winded at times. It feels like it takes us a long time to get to where we ultimately want to be. So it does feel like it drags a bit at times. It's one of the slower episodes. But we get to a support craft from Baylock's ship, which has departed and gone away. And this smaller support craft is now being tasked with tractoring the Enterprise back to the First Federation, where the crew will allegedly be disembarking, taken into custody, and the Enterprise will be destroyed. So that has happened after Kirk's wonderful bluff. I mean, I can't believe I've skipped over that. It's obviously a thumbs up and definitely worth mentioning. His poker bluff after a conversation with Spock about chess. It works, and he convinces the opposing force to delay their destruction based on this bluff that they have this device called Corbomite, which will repel an energy of equal force, destroying the attacker should they be attacked. So that was really, really clever. Corbomite is mentioned in one further episode later on in the series, and we'll get to that, but it was never mentioned again other than one additional episode in season 2. So really like that, but I digress. We get to the point where they're being tracted away, and this gives Kirk the opportunity to believe that his opponent is getting a little cocky, a little overconfident, towing them away with this smaller ship, which must be giving a big power drain. And they pick up on this, and they manage to break away. And in doing so, they realize that they have disabled the smaller vessel, which has been towing them. And this really sets me up for a really big thumbs up, where Kirk says that we're going over there, we're going to help, we're going to support the First Federation vessel and whatever crew is aboard, because when protests are offered to the captain, he reminds Dr. McCoy in particular, I think it was, what's the mission of this vessel? To seek out, contact new life. We're going to show what our big, meaningful words are actually about. We're going to demonstrate our peaceful intentions, who we are as a human race, as a species, and that I love. Absolutely love. So we get down to the transport room, we're going to beam over to this ship, and another thumbs up here, Mr. Bailey, who had previously been sent off the bridge for his outburst, comes back, has calmed down, and returns to his post. Big props to him for doing that. Kirk decides to make him a part of the landing party. He owes him a glimpse into the unknown, and there's no such thing as the unknown. That's another thumbs up from earlier in this episode, when Kirk reassures his crew when they're in this position of being threatened with destruction. He communicates to his crew, reassures him that he believes they can demonstrate who they are, their peaceful intent, and they can overcome this, and they shouldn't be afraid, because there's only no such thing as the unknown, only things temporarily obscured and hidden. Absolutely love that. But back to this scene in the transporter room, we get to see a little bit of trivia here. In season 1 of Star Trek, we get to see these little sashes that you put on to hold your equipment. These little orangey coloured sashes that are tied around, and then the phaser weapon and communicator that Scotty hands to Kirk and the others. We see those versions of these equipment for the first time. Very small handheld Type 1 phaser, which I really like. And then the communicator, which is a slimmed down version of that which we saw in the cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before. So we're getting ready to beam over to the alien vessel. Scotty tells them to crouch down because it's very cramped, low ceilings over there, which I love that detail is included. And they beam over. And then we see that indeed it is very, very small, cramped environment over there. And then, yeah, they find the puppet, and they come to the realization this wasn't real. This was a ruse. This scary-looking being, or intended to be a scary-looking being, was not really such at all. And I was never convinced by this, so it's a little bit of a thumbs down for me, because it was telegraphed a bit. But maybe I'm just so used to this episode and I've seen it so many times that maybe I can't see that sense of shock and awe that Baylock was never really real. But then we get a wonderful thumbs up. We get the revelation that Baylock, whilst obviously a very adult and intelligent being, is actually in the form of a very small being, played by a small child in this case, who was played by the very memorable, recognizable, and much loved Clint Howard, brother of Ron Howard of Happy Days fame. And Clint Howard would come to have a hell of a resume when it comes to Star Trek, not only Star Trek, but a very broad career in general. But his first, but by no means his last appearance in Star Trek. He's been in Star Trek in other roles many times, and we will highlight those along the way as we see him. I don't believe he features in the original series of Star Trek again, but he does appear in other Star Trek iterations along the way, and we will call those out when we get to them. But loved his performance. I don't think this is Clint Howard's voice here. In fact, I'm pretty certain it's not. But I love the message here that comes across, that he and his fellow First Federation people, whatever their species is, could be a mixture of people, who knows. But we only see Baylock, we don't see any of the other crew, and we never find out what this First Federation community comprises of. Are we to assume that they are all the same as Baylock? But they're explorers. We get the sense that they're explorers. They wanted to meet new people, test their intentions. There was obviously a bit of fear there that they were going to encounter people who were not like-minded, who were a threat to them. So they've tested them in this way, which is understandable, as we would come to see in the travels of the Enterprise throughout the next few seasons, that not everyone is like us. Not everyone has those good intentions. There are some malevolent species out there, some species with not so good intentions. So this is a real meeting of minds in this final scene, and I absolutely love this. We are introduced to Tranya, the drink of choice for Baylock, and he offers this to our three landing party members, Kirk, McCoy, and Bailey. And they receive the drink with a bit of distrust. They won't drink it until Baylock says, please, and he drinks it himself to prove that it's not poisonous. Who's to know that it's not poisonous to humans, but fine for Baylock? That's an interesting point that I always wondered about. But he reassures them that it's fine. The Tranya, which when I was younger, I always thought to myself, that's orange juice. I'm sure it was a lot more stronger than orange juice, but I always thought of it as orange juice when I was a kid. But it's absolutely fine. And Tranya would be mentioned many, many more times in various different versions of Star Trek along the way. We'll try and catch that out as we go, as further trivia for you as we go through these series. Love that, though. Really nice moment. Sharing a toast, sharing a drink. Fantastic. Then we cap a real journey in this episode, a real journey of growth for Bailey. Big smile on his face as he agrees to be a cultural exchange for for Kirk and Baylock here to learn more about each other. He decides to stay behind and get that experience. And I think this is a real evolution of him, that glimpse of the unknown. And I think what I always wondered about was Kirk says a line, "I'll get a better officer in return." I never knew how to take that, whether Kirk meant after Bailey had had his time there, he would come back a better officer, or the fact that Bailey was just not suited to life aboard a Federation starship and the pressures of it. And he was saying, yeah, I'm going to get rid of this guy and I'm going to get someone else better in return, which ultimately turns out to be true because we never see Bailey again, which is a shame, really. It would be nice to see his character development. Great actor, great character, but one of a few navigators that we see in Series 1 who are limited to either one or two or three appearances and then are not really seen again. But great journey for him in a short one episode arc, and I like the growth that we see. We end with a little tour of the ship, music starts to play, and the credits start to roll, and we see that this episode is directed by Joseph Sargent. And as per IMDb, this is in fact the only episode that Joseph Sargent directed. He would not go on to do any further episodes. As the credits continue to roll, we get the familiar theme music by Alexander Courage, but we also see that music was composed and conducted by Fred Steiner. So I am taking that to mean that Fred Steiner would do compositions for the actual episodes, and the original theme was by Alexander Courage. I will research that a bit more and find out more about that as we go, because unlike future versions of Star Trek, which had various different composers in their runs, most notably Next Generation, the Berman era of Star Trek, Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, would have mainly episodes done by Jay Chataway and Dennis McCarthy, great composers, particularly Jay Chataway, in my opinion, one of my favorites. But throughout the original series, it was more limited. But we'll get more into the music as we go, because as you'll get to know, I'm a big fan of musical scores in television, and just love music in film and TV. But there we go. And that is it, my friends. That is my retrospective recollections of the Corbomite Maneuver, what I liked, what was a thumbs down, bit of trivia thrown in for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be back with the next episode for you very soon, which will be Mudd's Women. I'm looking forward to going through that one. You all take care, stay safe, travel well, live long and prosper. Bye-bye.